So let's move to the next page. We're going to move to page 86 now. And as we move to page 86 is, we're going to go through this page because this page, we were just looking at questions where we were interpreting what seasonal indices actually mean. But now we need to actually go through the full process of deseasonalizing our data so that we're getting deseasonalized data, which we can then graph onto our original data, have a smooth version of the data, and then make a clearer statement about whether there is an increasing or decreasing trend evident. So for us to be able to do this, let's look through the process. Now, I'll take you through the process at the moment, and it's clearly outlined on 86. There's a lot of terms that I'm going to use. As I go through the steps, I'm then going to move to example 13 on the next page, and I'm going to illustrate those steps in the context of a question, so it might make better or clearer sense to you. So when you're actually and when you are calculating seasonal indices, so we've looked at interpreting seasonal indice values. Now we're looking at the actual physical calculation if you're given a set of data. There are many steps in this process, but if you work systematically, it's very straightforward. So to start off with, when we look at step 1, the first thing that we need to do is work out the average value of the data for each cycle. This is what we call the seasonal average. To work out a seasonal average, you add up all the data values that you have in the cycle and you divide it by the number of data values in the cycle. Again, at the moment, this is just a formula, but in a few minutes, I'm going to move to example 11, and I will show you with an example what that actually means. In step 2, once you've calculated your seasonal average, you need to express each value of the data as a proportion of the seasonal average. So what we're asking you to do is take the actual data values and change them to a seasonal proportion. So you take your actual value, that was the original data that you were provided with, and you divide it by the seasonal average that you calculated in step 1. When you do this to your data, you have now got seasonal proportion, and using those seasonal proportion values now, we move to step 3 and we calculate the seasonal index. And the way that we calculate the seasonal index is we sum together all the seasonal proportions for that point in the cycle and we divide it by the number of the cycles. So 3-step process, 3 different formulas to consider, lots of new terms here. So I'm just going to highlight the terms here. So I'm using the term seasonal index, I'm using the term seasonal proportion, and I'm also, in the previous one, using the term seasonal average. So we need to make sure we're clear on what each of these 3 different values actually mean and how to calculate them, because if you look for all 3 of them, there's a different formula. So you've got to make sure you're applying the right formula for each of these. So once you've calculated your seasonal index, you then need to, I'll come back to this point in a minute when we start working through questions. This is just saying if the data you get is just for a single cycle. So that means if it was quarterly data, you only had data for 1 year, and you had 1 data value for summer, 1 data value for autumn, 1 data value for winter, 1 data value for spring, okay? So you've only got 4 values, 1 cycle, 1 year, and you have to work out the seasonal index. So when you've only got 1 cycle, it's actually easier because your seasonal index actually equals the seasonal proportion. so you don't actually have to do step 3. But when I do, again, that will make more sense to you as I work through some examples. So just bear with me for a few moments and then you'll see what I mean as we work through the questions. Once you've calculated your seasonal index, you now need to go back to your original data and you need to deseasonalize that data. So to deseasonalize the data, all you need to now do is divide each piece of the original data by the seasonal index so that you now have deseasonalized figures. And this formula here, a deseasonalized figure is actually the actual figure divided by the seasonal index. Okay? You get given a formula sheet in the exam. This particular equation is listed on that formula sheet, but as you will have your notes in both exams, I would assume that you'd also have this written in your own booklet of notes, because it's a very important relationship to be familiar with. So once you've gone through, divided all of the original data by the calculated seasonal index, you've got deseasonalized data now, and you can now go and plot that deseasonalized data on the original data graph, and you can see you'll have a smoothened version of the data, and therefore you can make your interpretation as to whether there's an increasing or decreasing trend. Okay, so you will see the seasonally adjusted figures will help you view the trend more clearly. Now, when you get to the stage where you're looking at past exam papers, VCA will ask you questions about calculating the deseasonalized figure by providing you with the actual figure and the seasonal index, but they've also asked you to calculate, for instance, the seasonal index if they provide you with the actual data, the original data value, and the deseasonalized figure. So this relationship here is actually derived from this equation up here. All we're doing is we're taking this denominator, we're making this a subject, and we're moving this deseasonalized figure here and bringing it over to the other side. So we're making seasonal index the subject in this one, and to take that through to all cases, there are also questions where they give you the deseasonalized figure and the seasonal index, and they ask for the actual figure. So by transposing this formula again, making the actual figure the subject, you can see that when the seasonal index is moved to this side, it's actually the deseasonalized figure times by the seasonal index. So these are the 3 relationships that you need to be familiar with, either calculating deseasonalized figure given actual figure and seasonal index, calculating the seasonal index given the actual figure and deseasonalized figure, or working out the actual figure given in a question you've got the seasonal index and deseasonalized figures. So essentially they all stem from that first equation. We've just transposed them so that we've got all the different subjects being considered. Now in your notes, I would suggest for one less thing for you to do in an exam, have all 3 listed, because you don't want to, in the rush of doing an exam, make a transposition mistake. So if you've got them all neatly set up as we have in the booklet here, and you've got the one under the other, you can look at the question, see what information you're provided with. If you have to work out seasonal index, you go for this option, write down this, and then substitute accordingly. If they're asking you to calculate the actual figure, you want this one. So it's just saving you a step, essentially, if you've got all 3 there. And that might be a good approach to adopt.